Hey, it's Clex. So this time we have a build guide for the Illusionist. It's a pet Illusionist, rogue nature. And this is my first ever go at pets. Really, I've played this game a long time, but I don't think I've ever taken a pet build past normal mode, probably. It's just not my play style. However, this pet build was a lot of fun to play, and it performed amazingly well, considering that I played it on X-Max and no inheritance. If you inherit gear or if you just play on non-X-Max, this thing's going to demolish content. But here's the thing, it is a hard character to play. It was a difficult character to build, stat-wise, attribute, skill points, and it's by far the hardest character I've played mechanically in this game as well. But even if that's not your bag, you could still probably glean something from this video if you're looking to build pet characters of your own, whatever that might be. Stick around. I'll have some information that I've learned and I can bring that to you. First though, I'm going to throw some charts up on the screen as always. If you're looking to just see how the character is built while you're leveling, where to spend your skill points, how to spend your attributes, go ahead and take a look at the screen, and I'm going to go over some pros and cons. So first, the Rogue Mastery itself is amazing. This has been a dark horse for me. I never used to play Rogue Mastery before. It was by far my least played, in fact. But lately I've made a couple Rogue Mastery characters and have absolutely fallen in love with it. I think it has tools for so many builds. The tools it provides are extremely effective. They're not just kind of, I'll include this, sure. They're like build-defining things, right? And altogether, it's just completely changed the way I've thought of the Mastery. So for this build, we're going to be using Lay Trap, of course. Lay Trap is a pet. That means it qualifies for all of the pet bonuses. That is added damage or total speed or even health. This thing is going to be the majority of your damage in Epic and Legendary. Still is going to perform amazingly well in normal mode. And it's just an absolute monster. In my opinion, there's no pet that scales better with damage than Lay Trap. But take that as someone who's really never built too many pet builds. Secondarily, we'll have Disarm Traps. This opens up some grinds in the later game if you're not tough enough to fight Hydra. Then you can farm Automatoy to set you up for Legendary. You can also farm Dark Conduit for experience or relics. And you have Flash Powder. Now, Flash Powder is amazing, but it feels way better than amazing if you have some cast speed, which we will in this build. I worked in this Athena's Wisdom. If you have cast speed, you rarely ever whiff your Flash Powder. You'll know about that concept if you've watched my previous videos, but basically you want some cast speed. Not too much, 60%, more than fine. But anyway, you can use this ability to set up offensive kills. You can use it to save your life, to screen for your pets or protect them. Very flexible, short recharge, great ability. So this leads to the first con, which is that Nature Mastery is only so-so. Now, I don't build pet characters, and so my opinion of this has never been too high outside of Plague and Heart of the Oak. But as good as those abilities are, they're not as build-defining as what you get in Rogue Mastery. So Heart of the Oak, of course, gives you ridiculous amounts of health, like 85%. So you can get ludicrous levels of health if you want to. And that's good, don't get me wrong, it's way overpowered. But I find that often that amount of health is redundant in this game. Most of the ways you recover life in this game, besides your potion, are flat. They don't give you percentage of your health. It's just all flat health increases, regeneration, leech, it's part of your damage. Basically what I'm trying to say is regeneration is at a certain point, and if your health far exceeds that, then you get diminishing returns with your health. It's always good. This is an aRPG after all. More health the better. I'm just saying it's somewhat redundant later on. I didn't even get Heart of the Oak until like late Epic mode, something like that. I don't remember. It was pretty late though. And of course we're using Plague. Plague is amazing. Definitely amazing, but it's not as build defining in this build as Lay Trap. Mostly you like Plague because of susceptibility and fatigue. You're not really looking for the damage necessarily. It does have a learning curve, which makes it a very interesting ability for me. Learning how to spread your plague is pretty important. But this is a con point. I'm trying to describe a con. So what's bad about nature and pet builds? Well, wolves perform very, very well when you don't really need them to. And they die instantly when you kind of need their help. So that makes them I'm scratching my head. I don't know what to make of wolves, really. Maybe in other builds they would be stronger, but I suspect that they're always going to be very, very susceptible to death against certain fights, especially on X-Max. You have to keep in mind I'm playing on X-Max, so if there is environmental effects on difficult bosses or AoEs that you can't dodge, whatever, that's going to be tripled. Wolves just aren't designed for that. You don't care about that with your traps. They can die all they want. But with your wolves, you're definitely going to feel that 20-second recharge when they start dying a lot. So I felt like for their investment, they're only providing me sort of with a win more sort of thing. Like I didn't need them, but they were doing excellent when I didn't need them. But they're monsters in terms of damage. So just keep that in mind. That's why this is a con, is because I spent the majority of my skill points in nature, but I felt like Rogue Mastery was the true hero. And I also got Sylvan Nymph. I had room to, and I was planning on using throwing knives before, but it turns out this is a pretty complicated spec. So I decided to go for Sylvan Nymph instead. That way I can get that nice 7 pet layout to multiply all my damage by 7. We'll go over that in a bit. So the next pro then is this build is hilariously cheesy. Really, any pet build can be hilariously cheesy, but Lay Trap just brings it to a whole new level. So I'm going to show some video later on at the very end of the video on the how it plays section, where I'm going to demonstrate a couple ways to pull certain bosses and to cheese certain bosses. Just know that you can cheese just about any boss in the entire game. I think I cheesed every boss in the entire game, in fact, with Lay Trap. You don't have to be susceptible to your own death at all. You can do it as much as your heart's content to. If you feel cheesing is a little bit too much for you, you certainly don't have to. What I'm just saying is that Lay Trap provides a lot of hilarious cheese. So next is a con. I kind of went over this before, but this has very high micro and hotkey needs. You need auto hotkey, in my opinion, which is a secondary program to create macros so you can cast on your hotbar without creating a reticle. I've talked about this before in other builds that have required auto hotkey. You can use keyboard macros as well, but basically what you need is something for your computer to say, okay, I see you pressed a hotkey like the number 4 or 5, so immediately when you do that, I'm going to left click. That's what you need. That'll make the game play like every other aRPG that exists in the world. For some reason, Titan Quest, when you have an ability on your hotbar, if it's a certain type of targeted ability, it's gonna, when you click it, will create a reticle, and then you have to click again. That's very difficult. If you're trying to play quickly and you're trying to react quickly, that's just not any way you should play the game. So if you don't like the idea of using auto hotkey or anything like that, just know that this is going to be even more difficult to play. But it's already very micro-intensive, and you're spinning many, many plates. You have to know when to use your wolves. You have to know that you have to refresh after you use your wolves, and that if you accidentally whiff the cast on your wolf, you might waste your refresh. You're going to have to consider that you always have to have 3 traps out. They always have to be in a decent position. You always have to be in a good position yourself. And you have to kind of monitor your flash powder as well. There's a lot of spinning plates, like I said. It's a difficult build to play. You'll probably see that on screen and in the how to play section. But you'll most notice that if you watch the stream at all. It was very apparent most of the time that it was a very spammy, micro-intensive playstyle and build. That's beneficial to some people. Other people, that might turn you off. As another pro then, barring any kind of builds like perhaps a champion, this has the most pets that are always available to be able to multiply all your damage with Allfather's gear. So it has the most number of pets. It has 7 pets that are always out. What I meant by my caveat is some champions, nature, warrior, can use Keys of Elysium, and they can use high recharge to make sure they always have their wolves and their spirit buddies. So that build will technically outperform this build in the end-to-end game. But for the majority of the game and without endgame gear, this build will have 7 pets out. That's significant. It's going to provide you with an excellent amount of damage multiplication. So if you have a necklace that gives you plus 10 damage to your pets, if all you had was Core Dweller, then your core dweller would be hitting for an extra 10. That's fine. But if you have 3 traps, 3 wolves, and a Sylvan Nymph, all 7 of those pets are going to be hitting for 10. So that's, in an instance of time, 70 damage rather than 10. So it's straight, flat out multiplication. And trust me when I say that Lay Trap becomes an absolute monster with these effects. That thing hits so rapidly in AoE and pierces, it's amazing. And as the last con then, this build is very complex attribute-wise, probably the most complex build that I've played. And that's saying a lot because builds like my Shaman were very complex. However, because I needed to work in cast speed with this build and make it so it was a starter, it didn't require any inheritance, I had to use S'theno's Wisdom on my helmet. That means having a baseline of intellect, and I went for the legendary S'thenos, which is like 400 something int. And you have to have enough strength to equip the rest of your gear, or at least a decent shield. I think I ended up with 300 strength. Let me check that real quick. I ended up with 355 strength. That allowed me to equip a shield with the highest amount of pierce res on it, and a decent roll of health. It was permanence, rather than immortality, or I think immortality is the best. So permanence isn't quite the best health roll. But you want enough strength to get a decent shield. For me, that was 355. My intelligence ended at about 362, so I had it wrong. S'thenos does require 418 intellect to use, but I had a 20% reduction with Toth's Glory on my artifact. I'll go over my gear later. Just note that it's very delicate. You might benefit a lot from minus requirements if you could fit it in somewhere to buy your time for a Toth's Glory. You can't use Toth's Glory until level 55. And on top of both of those constraints, you need to have the dexterity for your Stonebinder's Cuffs. All pet builds are going to just eat up skill points like there's no tomorrow. They just need skill points. Wolves themselves, if you looked at them, they take like every single skill point on the planet just to buff them up fully. So the more you can get, the better. Overcap it, +4 it, +6 it, +10 it. That way you can use those other skill points to reinvest them somewhere else. So you need Stonebinders. That means you need the dexterity. 425 of it. Yep. So that's a lot of skill point requirements. You're going to have to balance that as you're leveling. Very, very complicated. Requires a lot of knowledge of the game and those requirement benchmarks, all that stuff. So just a fair warning. So before we explore gear options, I'll go over what type of character this is, which this character is a pet caster character. I had 1 point in the poison thing. It's not like I was applying Mandrake or Nightshade or anything. But I was attacking just for damage and because my character had nothing else to do once my pets were up. So I would call it a pet caster hybrid in how it plays. And it's definitely sword and board. You want to find a good sword with a lot of resists on it. And your shield is just there to provide your pierce res needs. Alright, so let's talk about gear. First thing on the list is S'theno's Wisdom. I mentioned this before, but I like to have cast speed on pretty much all of my characters, most of them anyway. Especially with Rogue Mastery, I find that the difference between having some cast speed and none means that I'm whiffing most of my flash powders. That's just me. It might be the way I play. I tend to stutter step a lot. If you tend to be more cautious with your play or less frantic with your play, then it's likely that you're going to whiff less of your spells. But for me, S'theno's was an absolute requirement, and for this build, even if you don't play the way I do, I recommend you get S'theno's. You're going to be casting so many spells all the time. You're not just holding down the right click and spamming shards. You are actively casting spells. Right hand, left hand. You're alternating. So because of that, I really recommend some cast speed. You also get Fizz Res. And by the way, this character had, I think, the most Fizz Res I've ever had on any character. I think at her height, she had something around 40% Fizz Res, which is pretty high. She did have a Veteran's chest piece at the time, but S'theno's definitely helps you out there. A final note on S'theno's, it does drop in the same place as Stonebinders, so you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. That's in the Labyrinth. If you're not sure where to farm it on the Labyrinth, there's plenty of guides. A lot of people like to talk about that. So you'll be able to find that farm spot. Just note that it's kind of hard to find a well-rolled S'theno's Wisdom. It took me a very long time to find a passable version. And that just has to do with the type of item this is. It's an intellect headpiece, and the way the attribute pool works and how the attributes are weighted, you're going to have to find a lot of garbage before you find a diamond in the rough. Next thing I want to talk about is this shield, Herons gear. This thing was a total lifesaver. I happened to find it. I got lucky. I got lucky twice, actually. This was the first case. I'll talk about the next one later. But Herons gear, what makes this really good is +2 to rapid construction. So this is a shield. You're going to use shields on this build for Pierce Res, which this thing provides. But this +2 rapid construction, it allows you to go from +2 skills in early epic with your +2 stone binders to +4 skills in early epic, or at least +4 into rapid construction. I'm going to tell you right now, if you're going to inherit one piece of gear, this is the piece you want to inherit. Where do you find it? Well, I'll tell you if you're listening. Ancient of the Soil, okay? Golden Boar, Surtur, Nidhogg, and the Great Mushroom Man. They're all about the same-ish chance. You might want to try Ancient of the Soil, just because he can drop 3 globes in X-Max. But anyway, it's pretty rare. I got very, very lucky. So if we go look at the skills, I can tell you just why it's so good. Rapid Construction, if you have it 8 of 8, it reduces your recharge on traps by 8 seconds. Traps has a 12-second recharge. So at the very best, when you have this thing maxed out, it's still going to have a 4-second recharge. If you have this thing +4'd, so 12 of 8, it reduces the cooldown completely, minus 12-second recharge. So the difference between +3 and +4 is that 1 second. And that 1 second is just the worst thing ever. I hate it so much. I tested it many times on stream to see how it felt. Just take my word for it. Having +4 is ludicrously night and day difference than +3. You're going to want +4 on rapid construction as early as possible. So that's where that shield comes in handy. There's other ways you can get +4, of course. You can get Revenant Plate. Good luck with that. Make sure to call your family before you disappear for the next year and a half. But you can also get some other plus skills gear. They might work. Heron's gear is going to be the easiest way to accomplish it. Plus all the other stats, 35 global armor, pretty nice. 60 DA at that point in the game, pretty good. 180 health. Everything here is very, very usable. And if you're trying to build a pet character in general, not just this build, what I have to say next is the most important thing. We're going to talk about prefixes and suffixes. Specifically, I'm talking about rings and amulets. You can find some of this stuff on other gear like staves. Again, this character doesn't use staves, but maybe yours does. And other places as well. I think I had a weapon at some point that provided them. So you're going to want to memorize these, by the way, and the level that they start appearing. Ritualists, for instance, is one of them. Spirit Callers at level 14. Beast Callers at level 3. And Allfathers. This is the one I'll stop on. And you can see it appears in 3 different types. Elemental damage, vitality damage, physical damage. You're going to have to determine, based on your build, which one to use. There's not a lot of ways to scale pet damage. The only ways are if you reduce your enemy's resists, or if you give your pets a global, like, aura, right? Those are the only ways to do it. They're not going to have a lot of this percent scaling. So really, you could do stuff, if it makes sense in your build, to give your Earth Rock Mastery guy, I don't know his name, Earth Monster. If it makes sense to give your Earth Monster vitality damage, give him vitality damage. If you're playing Earth Spirit, then that makes a lot of sense, because with Necrosis, you can reduce vitality resist by like 120%. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. That's a huge amount. So that would make complete sense. You might say, well, I have Earth Enchantment for my Rock Monster, so I can scale his elemental damage, or at least his fire damage. Keeping in mind that you're only scaling 1/3 of the elemental damage, because elemental damage is split 3 ways, cold, lightning, fire. That's still good, so maybe you say, well, okay, vitality is the best, but I can live with elemental. Maybe physical damage isn't the greatest, unless I'm reducing my enemy's armor. So you can tell with this monologue that there's going to be a best thing, but it's okay to settle if you need to. For me, the best thing was physical. It synergizes with my Wolf Howl, so I get a little bit more benefit, plus the magnitude is for some reason a little bit higher, 111 instead of 100. And if I could have gotten the Stew of Enhenyar, the relic that you put on your chest piece, a new one with Ragnarok, if I got the completion bonus to reduce armor, then I could have made even more use out of this physical damage. That's more of a meta thing. Next, we're going to look at suffixes. So there is a pet suffix that's pretty good. It's of Convocation. And it gives 20% attack damage converted to health for your pets, and gives them 20% total damage. Now, the attack damage converted to health, that's a pretty high magnitude, and that would help with wolf sustain. But again, I don't think there's any sustain on the face of this planet that was going to save my wolves in a lot of cases. Note that again, I was playing on X-Max, so anytime there was something that would likely kill wolves in the game, it would really, really, really kill the wolves. So no sustain, no regrowth, nothing was that going to save my wolves. So I opted to not use Convocation, instead being greedy and getting defensive ability for my own character, which I would recommend, to be honest. The total damage is very good, but if you're looking to get like a ring, All Fathers of Convocation, it's going to take a long, long time. Note that these are both green tier. Once you reach Wraith Lords and All Fathers, those are both in the green affix pool. Of Convocation is also in the green affix pool. So combining a green affix prefix with a green suffix takes a very long time. All Fathers is very frequent, you find it all the time. Convocation's very rare. I have never found a All Fathers ring of Convocation, and I've done a lot of ring shopping. The last thing I want to mention, and I kind of hinted at it before, was that you need to squeeze every amount of resists on your gear out as humanly possible. Note that you're giving up prefixes on your 2 rings and your amulet at the very least, in order to fit in some of the nice pet Allfather stuff. Prefixes are where you usually have your resists on your rings and amulets. All the swap rings, prismatic amulet, annulling amulet, that sort of thing. You have to give those up, plus all of the really nice epic and legendary rings, just to use this stuff. And I'm talking about a no inheritance playthrough here, so any pet bonus, like the Black Pearl stuff, whatever, all that stuff, I'm not going to mention that here. I'm talking about a non-inheritance starter character. Plus, I think this stuff would be better anyway. But anyway, you're going to have to make more use out of your other gear in order to get your resists back that you sacrificed for All Fathers. I hope that makes sense. I still carried swap rings around, plenty of them, I think 2 for each element. And I used them from time to time. Like if I really needed to cap something and I was low, then I would use a swap ring. But for 90% of the game or more, I used all of these Beast Callers, All Fathers, Wraith Lords, Spirit Callers, Ritualists, all that stuff. And so that whole time, I didn't have access to those nice resists on the prefixes. So just keep in mind, you're going to have to work harder at it, dedicate the rest of your gear, literally, to resists. For me, I got lucky a second time, and this is what I teased before, is I got another Tunic of the Magi. So Tunic of the Magi, if you count all these up, I'll do the math real quick, it's something like, 1 million. It's a ton of resists. Realistically, it's like 300 or so. That's pretty much carried my resists in Legendary. I did upgrade it. I probably got armor and energy as typical at the Legendary vendor. But you also get 210 defensive ability. That's nothing to scoff at, considering that endgame DA nowadays is like 1,000, maybe 1,200. This makes up a fifth of that, just in the chest piece. Really, really good. Plus, you have stat issues, so the 21 intelligence goes a pretty long way, actually. So I got lucky here. You might not get lucky in your playthrough, in which case you'll have to sacrifice even more than I did. Let's talk about leveling real quick then. This will actually be pretty quick. The biggest difficulty is in the early game in normal mode. But you're going to start with wolves. Get your wolves up to 7 as quickly as possible. That increases their summon limit. So as early as you can, get your wolves to 7. After that, move up to plague. And plague is really going to carry a lot of your damage in the early game. Wolves are going to kill the tankier minions. Plague is going to kill everything else. You're going to have wolves in the early game. By mid-Act 3 or so, take away all of your points in wolves. Dedicate them towards getting traps, maybe rapid construction as well. You're going to have plague the whole time. Plague fatigue in the early game is very helpful. And the rest of it's kind of up to you. I personally opted to stay away from Heart of the Oak until about Epic. It's obviously overpowered. It's an incredible skill, but it's almost unnecessary. Also, I think if you're going to top a tree first to get, that nice 32 to help with your stats and equipment, cap the nature mastery first. That way you get refresh. The combo here is summon a wolf, then refresh, then summon another wolf. You're only going to need 1 point in refresh with +4 skills. That makes it perfect because you'll be able to get no cooldown. You'll just be able to wolf, refresh wolf right away. I would just keep 1 point in it regardless. In the earlier game, you might have to suffer through, 2 seconds after you use a refresh or something like that before you can summon another wolf. But this is important because, as I've said a few times, your wolves are just going to die. Ain't nothing you can do about it. So instead of trying to sustain them, I would just resummon them if they die. So the quicker you can resummon them, the better. Your character is going to have some downtime, so you might as well summon your wolves. You could say use regrowth. I am against regrowth. I think for its investment, it doesn't do enough. Like I said, when the wolves are dying, they really dead. My argument is that for 28 points, which is what it would take, you're better off served elsewhere. Get some other stuff. There's plenty you can get here that's useful. I just don't think regrowth is good enough. I ditched it very early on. And of course, legendary, I picked up Sylvan Nymph. I think she's useful. She's another pet. Multiplies all your Allfather's gear. So you have 3 pieces of Allfather's gear, that's 300 flat damage. She's just another multiplier. She does range damage. She's a little bit more tanky because she's not as stupid as your wolves are. So she's okay. I have maxed her abilities too, just for fun. She's not my favorite pet, but if you're scaling pet damage, then she's fine. And I had some downtime on my character every now and then. I wouldn't recommend going throwing knives. The original thought for this character was to use throwing knives and to apply armor reduction to my enemies. That way I could make better use of added physical damage on my pets. But I found that if I added throwing knives to my build, it was just going to be a mess. I mean, this thing was already really hard to play. So if you want to try something like that, go for it. The mana issues weren't too bad, not as bad as I thought. But you're definitely going to want everything in traps. Disarm traps opens up some boss possibilities for you, farming possibilities. Dark Conduit if you want experience and relics in Act 2. And of course, you can farm Automatoi. If you're not strong enough for Hydra, which is likely the case, you can farm Automatoi. His gear drops are very good. And that'll set you up for the rest of Legendary, the hardest part of the game. So that's typically very good. And of course, Flash Powder, I rave about this thing all the time. It's one of my favorite abilities. Again, this is something you need some cast speed. If you don't have any cast speed, it feels awful. That might be the way I play the game, though. I stutter step a lot. So if you don't have that playstyle, then maybe you don't need the cast speed, but I will argue that this build needs it regardless. You're casting a lot of things. Alright, I'm going to go over my gear real quick, and note that this is legendary. Here's my resists. Now first, of course, I'll talk about these rings. I ended up kind of settling for them. This one, for instance, is Wraith Lords instead of Allfathers. I did get the right damage type, it's physical, slightly better than Elemental or Vitality for this build. And I was going for DA on all of these. You see I got 95, 93. I wanted to hit that nice 1000 breakpoint for defensive ability. That's nothing, that's just made up. I made it up. I want to have 1000 DA for every character. It seems about right with the new Ragnarok stuff. But anyway, the rest of these rings, this one was elemental damage. It's alright. I farmed Corinth, the ring vendor there, for about an hour tops to get these pieces. This one, for instance, is perfect. 95 DA and Allfathers 111 Fizz. That's the exact thing I wanted to find on these rings as well. And a half hour to an hour more of farming, and I could have done that pretty easily. So just keep that in mind. It's pretty easy to find these rings. They should be a staple in your build no matter what. The other things I mentioned then, Tunic of the Magi. This thing carries my resists. I think I said that when I reforged it, I got armor and energy. Well, I was close. I got armor and health regen. So there you go. That's a pretty typical result for me, but you know how it goes. Anyway, this thing is propping up my resists. That's very important. It's important to have an item like this. That way you could even equip these to begin with. Again, I barely hit those resist benchmarks that you need, capping the resists. I'm a little bit short on a few of them, but like, 6. That's not a big deal. So in order to buy my way into this pet gear, I had to find something with resists, and not just this thing. My weapons got resists as well. Elemental and poison. This is an excellent weapon, just because of the resist. I don't use it for anything else. I don't really care about the reduced damage even, although that is a very cool stat. Instead, this thing gives me, 150% resists on a weapon? That's what I was looking for. I spend my filler time attacking with it, but it's not a big part of my build offensively. Of course, shields. This is a typical endgame looking shield for me. Again, I couldn't get too high of strength. I had to kind of go strength, intelligence, and dexterity for this build. So I had to sacrifice, with a higher level shield, one that has a higher strength cost, I could maybe have gotten the immortality affix available to me, which is a higher amount of health. In fact, it goes up to like 650. So I could have doubled the amount of health on this thing with more strength, but I had to make do with the strength that I had. And this is a pretty good roll. I still get the maximum resist roll, impenetrable. I just don't get as much health. So this is a very good compromise, I would say, and something I would suggest wearing. You can see it takes care of pretty much all of my Pierce Res needs. Note that for most of the game I was using Herons gear, like I said. I didn't switch to this until Legendary, I think, when I got +4 skills by other means. In fact, yeah, it was when I created my Toss Glory. By the way, I've got Toss Glory. I love this artifact. I use it on multiple characters. Actually, this character mostly needed the reduction to all requirements, but the +1 skills was fully utilized as well. You can see my +3 Stonebinder's Cuffs here. I still needed +1. Of course, I didn't get hollowed on my Sathanos Wisdom. That means I need to get +1 somewhere. So that came in the form of Toss Glory. The other resistance, the secondary resistances here, those are pretty good as well, don't get me wrong. I think without it, yeah, I've got like nothing without it. Part of that might be that my gear is unequipable without it. But anyway, it's holding up my secondaries as well. I found these boots, Britamarius's Defiance. I don't even know. I found them pretty early on. You could see level 35. Must have been Act 5 normal when I found them. And if you look at the stats, they're pretty good. Solid resists, health, high movement speed. I mean, what more could you ask for in boots? I think this is pretty good. Maybe there's better out there. Honestly, I didn't even look. I figured if I found something great, awesome, I'd equip it. But this thing gives Phys Res too. And you can see my Phys Res is pretty high. 28. I said at one point with this character I had 40% Phys Res. That was with a veteran's chest piece, but 28 is still nothing to scoff at. This made a huge difference in gameplay. And of course I talked about Sathanos Wisdom and how difficult it is to get a well-rolled one. I got 69% slow res. That was literally the best I could find. I found about 15 legendary Sathanos. This was the best one. So take that as a bit of anecdotal evidence that it's very hard to roll a really nice intellect helmet. So you might have to make do too. Maybe you'll get luckier than I did. I have found reduced requirements pretty often on Sathanos. So if you're looking for one in normal mode and epic, and by the way, you're going to have one, you're going to have the normal mode version and the epic mode version. Maybe you could fish for those affixes. Of course, you're not going to have a Toss Glory that early on. So finding minus requirements on your helmet might help you with your stats a little bit. Again, this is a very difficult character to build attribute-wise. And there's nothing more to say. This is a very nice pair of Stonebinders, so I got lucky with that. Altogether, it's not very interesting. Of course, I still have swap gear. All of the elemental stuff that I need. Just in case I run into something, a ritual necklace, this thing helps against demons. And then it's just the standard lightning swap, fire swap, cold swap. In case I really needed those resists, of course, they're not necessary anymore. But in early Legendary, before you find some nice stuff, you might require your swap items just to get through certain parts of the game. And last thing I'll say about my gear is, you'll notice in a lot of playthroughs I carry around these scrolls here, Primal Chaos. These things are amazing. Even the normal mode version gives 40% damage absorption. This thing is like a better Colossus that you can use on any character. It stacks with Colossus as well. It's incredible. So I would definitely recommend using these before they nerf them. I think they're definitely overpowered. In fact, I thought they were overpowered before they changed them. It used to be 40 flat damage absorb. Now it's 40%. So they buffed them when they were already out of control. So now they're just absurd. But maybe that's just my opinion. I don't know how you could conceive of this thing being weak. The only time I don't use it is if I'm afraid of the minus 33% cast speed. But with Legendary Cythenos, I have 90%. So even with that Malice, I still have 60%, so I don't usually whiff my spells. But if it were normal mode, I did in normal mode a few times opt to not use Primal Chaos when I otherwise would have, because I was afraid of whiffing my spells. So that's the only thing you have to worry about. And anyway, I told you guys at the beginning of the video that I was going to show you some of the hilarious cheese that this character is capable of. But really it's any character who uses pets that can do this sort of thing. So I am playing on X-Max. Bosses are multiplied by 3. This is legendary. So how do you fight a boss that's as dangerous as Minotaur? Well, one thing you could do is body pull with your pets. You could basically double your body pull radius just by sending your pet out like this. You can bind a key to send them away. For me, it's R. And you simply wait for one of these guys to show up. He'll probably kill your wolf. You could send him back this way. And there you go. Now we've trapped Minotaur Lord. So now we want to pull the next one. I'm going to resummon this wolf. And certain bosses are going to have certain leash ranges, so I'm not going to say that this works for every single boss out there. But I'll show you one other form of cheese that you could use as well. You can see this is a very consistent way to get this guy out of there. And you can see how fast this boss kills, or this character kills bosses. Again, this is legendary difficulty. And there you go, Rip Minotaur. I'm going to go to one more place and describe one more cheese. I'll see you guys there. Alright, so we're here at Act 3 Telkine. Now, he's not a very difficult boss. He's just a good candidate to show off more types of cheese you can do. So this is just, I don't even know what to call it, platform cheese. But basically you could stand in a place that these guys have no chance of getting to you, and just launch your traps out, and your traps are going to do all of the damage for you. Now, it's typically best to space out your traps, that way they can't get AoE'd when doing this. This particular cheese is kind of difficult to do that. Now, this is by no means necessary. This character can easily just walk in there, and I can, in fact, get a lot more damage by letting these things separate in the room so that way they don't kill them. They'll get a much higher uptime and damage. This is, again, just to demonstrate the type of thing you can do, and this is obviously very cheesy. You're getting damage in on the bosses. If you're patient enough, you can completely kill a legendary boss without having to do anything. You could probably see how to adapt this sort of strategy against something like Hydra, or against something like Typhon, especially if you know how to rubber band creatures, if you know what rubber banding is. It's just a matter of abusing their leash range. So, in other words, you'll activate them, they'll run towards you. You find the spot at which you can move back slightly, enough for them to start to move back to their original location. And then you move up slightly, and they'll come towards you again, and then you move back slightly, and they'll move away. They prioritize that movement, that leashing and re-engaging. So that means you could just have your traps out, and they'll just keep running back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's very likely that you've done this by accident without even knowing it, and you've noticed that little quirk of the AI. Typhon is very easy to abuse this way, especially after they made him anti-cheesy. You used to be able to just sit at the edge of his platform and shoot him. You could still do that, by the way. It's just harder now. But they got tired of that, so they decreased his leash range. Or, yeah, that's right. So he leashes quicker now. That actually makes it easier to do this trap strategy, because you can easier just kind of bouncing back and forth, and your traps are going to kill him. Again, one of the hardest bosses in the game, Typhon. In my opinion, the hardest boss in the game, barring maybe Hydra. And you could do it to Hydra too. You can adapt the strategy however you like to, and I'm telling you, you can cheese every single boss in the game. You don't have to take any damage or risk anything. You just kill them. It might not be the fastest kill, but you have no danger of dying. And especially on something like X-Max, bosses are the hardest part of the game. Alright, the last thing I want to do is show you guys how to play this character. First, we're going to start out with some wolf quirks. You're going to probably pick these up pretty quickly. But notice that 2 of my wolves are damaged. They're the top 2. We are not relying on regrowth or any heals for our wolves. We don't have rally or anything like that. We're just going to resurrect them when they die. That's the recommended playstyle from me. So the top 2 wolves are dead, or almost dead. This is actually a great time to resummon them. And the way resummoning works is when you click your wolves, it's going to resummon the top one. It doesn't matter if he was the most damaged or not. You're going to resummon the top wolf. So again, it's this wolf here that's going to be resummoned. Now I have 3 wolves that are totally healthy. Say, for instance, it's the bottom wolf that's damaged, and you want to resummon him because you feel like in the next combat he's just going to die right away. Or he might not die right away and you're just annoyed by it or whatever. I resummon the bottom wolf all the time. In order to get to him, you're going to have to summon 3 more wolves. So instead, what I recommend is disbanding and then resummoning. So that's just kind of some small micromanagements you could do with your wolves. Again, I recommend keeping them on normal, not aggressive. That way they don't just get themselves killed too quickly. You want to present yourself as a target. You want your nymph to be somewhat of a target. You want to spread all the damage around. You don't want any of your wolves to be too aggressive and just die immediately. So other things then, when you first start to engage with the pack, you're going to use your traps first. You're going to try to find a good candidate for Plague. I found a very bad candidate there for mine. And notice, I didn't let my wolves go in right away. Are they losing damage because of that? Absolutely. But it doesn't really matter. You don't need the damage. And any melee that starts to attack you are going to get gobbled up by your wolves. So let your traps take care of the casters and the archers and get the initial aggro. And then try to do something with your traps. Or to do something with your Plague and your flash powder. And hopefully your wolves won't take too much damage. So we'll go through a couple more packs here again. Always looking for my traps to be the first to engage. I don't want myself or my pets to do it. You can see I've way overextended there. It's really important to get a good Plague. The difference between getting a Plague off and not getting a Plague off is, that. You'll be full health or you'll almost die. Of course, I was being a little bit too aggressive there. But you can see what just a little bit of time away from this character has done to my muscle memory, or just the way I play the character in general. I had to really learn the optimal way to play this. It is, again, by far the most difficult character I've played. And so there's little things you do like that offensive powder to help your wolves. And, making sure you get the right Plague. Maybe not going in for an offensive powder if you whiffed your Plague or got a bad Plague because you take too much damage. But if you did get a Plague, go ahead and get a powder off. That'll kind of keep mobs in place and stuff and let your wolves kill them. It's really synergistic. And otherwise, if your wolves take too much damage, let's see if I can get them to take damage. A little bit. So I want to resummon 2 of them now. You want to make sure that you hit wolf first, and then refresh, and then wolf again. That's pretty important. Very easy to screw up. So I'll try to demonstrate screwing it up here. I was hoping my wolves would take a little bit more damage from these guys, but that's okay. There's a delicate balance in presenting yourself as a target. By the way, if you feel like you're too overwhelmed with mobs, just back off. I kind of settled a lot when I was streaming this character that you want to clear forward. This character doesn't have a lot of tools if he's surrounded to get out of harm's way. You need to clear a path, that way you have a retreat path. Very important for any pet class, I think. Alright, so let's say I was frantically trying to resummon my wolves, and I was moving, and I hit wolf summon, and it didn't go off, and I hit refresh to summon another wolf. You can see what that does. I only got one wolf off, and now both of these things are on cooldown. So it's very important, this is the whole spinning plates thing, that you make sure that when you summon your first wolf, it goes off before you refresh and summon another one. So the playstyle is going to revolve around this whole thing of making sure your traps get the aggro, making sure your wolves aren't dead, making sure when you look at your wolves how you can resummon them smartly. Again, if it were my final wolf in the middle of combat, I'd have to disband the final one, you know, or let him die. It's up to you, really. But you want to make sure that you have monitored your plague, that you found a good plague target for every pack that you're fighting. And depending on how that plague went, you either want to go for an offensive flash powder or maybe save it, or maybe present yourself as a target, but in a less aggressive way. That way you don't get overwhelmed. There's a lot of things you have to consider, a lot of things you have to spot, and a lot of things you have to watch out for. And it changes dynamically pack to pack, but also monster type to monster type. You're going to fight stronger monsters, monsters with more range capabilities than others. It requires a lot of knowledge of the game, adaptation, fast thinking, and mechanical skill. I'm not saying it's the most skillful thing you'll ever do in a video game. It's not, you know, RTS levels of micro. But for Titan Quest, it's definitely the hardest character I have played. So those are all the major tips I have for you. There's some cheese, there's a lot of room for improvement with your own play. You're going to want to make sure you have auto hotkeys so everything is easy to cast. You're going to have a lot of buttons to press, so if that's all your play style, if that fits into what you like, you'll love this character. It's a very busy character, and it pays off. It's not busy for no reason. This character is absurdly powerful. So if you could deal with all that stuff, you're going to have a good old time with this character. So anyway, that's it for me for today. Don't worry, I've got at least one more build guide coming out for Titan Quest. That's going to be a Juggernaut, kind of a Reflect-ish sort of Juggernaut Defense Earth, and a few more videos for Titan Quest as well this month. So if you don't join in on Twitch, you can look forward to that on YouTube. Otherwise, come and hang out on Twitch, ask questions, that's always helpful, or comment on what's going on. I'm doing a challenge right now to do X-Max Deathless with no inheritance. I'm doing that on weekends and Mondays all April this year. So tune in for that if you're interested, and otherwise, I'll see you next time.